Welcome to the NIHR Dementia Researcher podcast, brought to you by dementiaresearcher.nihr.ac.uk in association with Alzheimer's Research UK and Alzheimer's Society, supporting early career dementia researchers across the world.
Hello and welcome to the Methods Matter podcast from Dementia Researcher and the National Centre for Research Methods, the show that tries to make sense of research methods to help me and you to understand them. I'm Dr. Donncha Mullin. I'm a PhD clinical fellow at the University of Edinburgh, and I research motoric cognitive risk, or more simply, I'm investigating slow walking speed in the presence of self-reported cognitive complaint in older people without dementia or mobility disability. You will all know by now that in these podcasts, we bring together a methodology expert and a dementia researcher who's put method into practice to talk about the why, how, and benefits of different methodologies and provide tips on avoiding some of the pitfalls. Today, we're talking about surveys, a go-to standard used widely in research and in business alike. Perfect for when you need to question individuals, test concepts, reflect attitudes of people, and establish their levels of satisfaction. However, you don't really want to hear that from me, and that's why we have an expert with us. So let's introduce our guests. Today's expert is Dr. Petra Boynton. Petra is a social psychologist specialising in international health research from a critical perspective. Over the past 20 years, she has taught, supervised, and undertaken research across the social and health sciences and development within university and community settings, as well as writing extensively about academic life, including publishing a book called Being Well in Academia. Hi, Petra. Great to meet you.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Thanks so much for coming along. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? You seem to have a fascinating career so far.
Thank you. I've been really lucky to go in lots of different directions I've been interested in. I'm predominantly interested in methods and different methods and working with communities, but most of my research has been on sensitive topics, and that's meant I've had to think very carefully about ethics and about sort of inclusion, and I apply my work by sort of doing advice giving and working as an Agony Aunt or advice columnist, so that's given an extra level of trying to sort of make work accessible to people.
I bet, an amazing way of bringing research out of these ivory tower type situations. You mentioned sensitive topics. Can you give me an idea what type of things have you talked about in the past?
Yes, my early research, predominantly in surveys, was sort of working around sexual and reproductive health and trying to find ways to get people to feel comfortable answering very personal topics. And more recently, I've been working on pregnancy and baby loss. So that's been thinking more about grief and memorialising and sort of being able to make people feel safe and able to share quite sensitive topics with a wider audience that they want to reach.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Well, I look forward to talking to you more on that. Thank you so much. Today, our researcher joins us all the way from Australia. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Larissa Bartlett, who is an Island Research Fellow at the Wicking Dementia Research and Education Centre at the University of Tasmania. Her PhD focused on the promises and challenges of workplace-delivered mindfulness interventions for employee health and performance. Now, Larissa leads the Island Study, a large 10-year prospective public health cohort study with nested interventions targeting modifiable dementia risk factors at population level in adults aged 50 plus. Hello, Larissa. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Donncha. Well done. That's such a big mouthful.
I was a wee bit worried that is it the Island Study, or is it spelt out ISLAND study? Or?
Yeah, no, we call it the Island Study. Yep.
Good. Well, we are delighted to have you here, and thank you so much for calling in with the time difference and everything. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, Larissa, I couldn't help but notice in the bio you provided that your fun fact was that you're, quotes, I'm a 10-pound pom of Birmingham stock, which I assume means you made the trip south at some point. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I have a very big family in England, but I grew up pretty much my whole life in Australia, and I think had a wonderful childhood as a result of my parents deciding to head over the other side of the world, but it's given me the opportunity to have footprints in both countries, which is really a great pleasure, and yeah.
Amazing.
I'm struggling to find a more interesting fun fact. I'm sure there's others.
It's always that line of how interesting do we really want to be with our fun facts? Yeah. Was it always Tasmania where you were based, or did you grow up in a different part of Australia?
Yeah, so it's very first arrived in Sydney, but my father got a position as a social worker on the northwest coast of Tasmania in the town called Penguin.
Oh, wow.
And then we moved around a few different places in Tasmania, but I grew up on this little island, which is actually where the island study is located. I left, as islanders do, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and went off. And I came back in my 30s, had some kiddies, and discovered a research career. So I'm very excited to be working on this island project. That's right
ideal.
at the bottom of the world.
Yeah, that's ideal. That's the dream, to get back to where a small place you grew up, but have a really, what sounds like a really challenging and interesting opportunity there. That's awesome. Now, I think we should crack on with the show. I don't want to go into midnight in Australia, so we'll start with our first segment, which is called "What Do I Know?" We begin each podcast with me summarising what I understand to be the method we're exploring, which, of course, today is surveys. Okay, so today I am feeling confident, although I suspect this is going to be more complicated than I first imagined. We've all completed polls and surveys. They seem to be a way to ask people what they think, but in a sort of more structured or focused way, essentially asking a series of questions. Maybe survey questions such as, which flavour of ice cream best represents you? Or would you rather fight 10 duck-sized horses or 1 horse-sized duck? Do you think pineapple belongs on pizza? These are all very important questions, but Petra, could you please correct me and properly introduce the method for us?
Oh, I think you've done a great job, actually. I wouldn't want to sort of change anything from the ducks and the horses, really. Interestingly, whenever I teach this, I have to actually write it down because, as you said, it's not as simple as you think it is. So I've written it down, and I'm going to just read it to you. So a survey is really referring to collecting a lot of information. So collecting and analysing, applying and interpreting information from big groups of people or small groups of people. And you do it with structured questions. So that could be the yes/no answer. Do you like ice cream? Yes, no. Or on a rating scale, 1 to 5, rate this flavour of ice cream. Or you might have seen more recently, particularly with online surveys, or if you've been in shops or airports or stations, a sort of emoji thing where you click the smiley or frowny face that shows where you best feel. So that's still a rating scale, but it's using sort of visuals within it. Or you can also use text responses, so people could answer prompts, but you're giving them quite specific prompts usually to respond to. And you can do this work on or offline.
Okay, and why would someone maybe choose surveys, do you think? Or what's your experience of that in the past? What motivated people to use surveys?
I think the main reason, and it's always been true, but the pandemic has definitely made a difference to this, is that it's seen as very quick and very easy, particularly with online surveys. And I think when we sort of hit a situation where it was harder to reach people, then, it seemed the most logical way that you could put something online and send out a link and people could respond. It's very familiar. We're mostly used to sort of filling in rating scales or quizzes. Very popular. People like doing those sort of quizzes and answers. So all of that, I think, are the reasons why people are drawn to it. But as you said, there's a kind of twist in the tail with this bit, is that all of those reasons are deceptive in that it's actually complicated and challenging and difficult. So I think I would say to most people, I wouldn't assume it's quicker and easier just because we're so familiar with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And there's something that I was never that clear on, and it's, what is the difference between polling and surveying? Or is it just terminology?
It is. There is a difference. So a poll is usually a couple of very quick questions. So they're normally done to gain, a general answer on something quite simplistic. So, what do you think of a prime minister, or what do you think of a choice of food, or something like that. A survey is more wide-ranging. It tends to be not necessarily reaching more people, but it's going into more issues in more depth. And a questionnaire, which is another sort of term that comes up in this, is the tool that you'd use to do the measuring. So quite often there's lots of words that are used interchangeably. Quite often people use survey to mean questionnaire and poll together. And, I think as long as we understand what we mean, that's okay.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for clearing that up. Now, Larissa, I'd like to bring you into the conversation if I could. Could you tell us a little bit about your research?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Donncha. There's a very good match with the Island Project and this topic of surveys. So the Island Project is a population-level dementia risk reduction health promotion program that's taking place in Tasmania, which is an island off the bottom of Australia, Australia's only island state. It has a population of about 500,000 people, and health profile that is a bit older and less well educated and a little bit less well off, I guess, than the rest of the other states and territories in Australia. So it's quite a good environment to have a look at the health and lifestyle factors that we understand to be related to contributing to dementia. So given this is a dementia podcast, I guess it's very topical. And so we've established this population-based study. The only way we can reach all of these people really is using online technologies and surveys. So our goal is to have our initial goal was to reach 10,000 people with the island messaging, which is the health promotion component, and then to include a good proportion of those people in research associated with the effectiveness of a health promotion campaign. So the goal is to, I guess, understand what people know about the potential to reduce dementia risk and then recruit them as part of a long-term 10-year health promotion study and increase what they know by providing them with all sorts of different ways of educating, I guess, and opportunities to participate in risk reduction activities. So it's a big project. We have 8,000 baseline people who've provided us with our baseline, and the baseline is surveys. So essentially what we ask people to do is come on board and tell us what their own health histories and demographics are, and tell us what they know about the potential to reduce your risk of dementia through a survey with a series of structured questions, what their motivations might be to change their behaviours related to dementia risks, also through surveys. And then we have another survey which is asking them about their behaviours and what they do in relation to how they manage their blood pressure and cholesterol and their sort of cardiometabolic health, their physical activity, their diet. So we collect a lot of information from our participants about their health and their behaviour and their lifestyle. And we've got 8,000 people, and I just don't think there's any way we could have achieved that without using the survey method and using our online approach. I've got so much I could say. There's so much about this study, but I guess one of the things that we need to be able to do is find out, well, what our goal of the study is to find out what people know and what their behaviours are and see whether we can change them. So our baseline is really to characterise what the Tasmanian adults' dementia risk profile or modifiable dementia risk profile might be, and then track them over this long period of time. But we also need to understand whether what they're telling us is really related to their actual health. And so one of the things about surveys is we can collect what I'm saying about myself, but it's really important to validate that information, particularly when you're looking at health outcomes and you're wanting to inform some policy on the other side. So we use other forms of data as well in the Island Project.
And what is it? Is it linkage to family medicine GP data, or what are the other methods as well?
That's down the track, I think, with linkage. Cool. So we started the study in 2019. We've invited the participants when they come back to do their annual surveys to join other parts of Ireland. And so we've got, I think, just under 1,700 people who've provided us with a blood sample. And we've got cognitive test, like functioning data, cognitive functioning data using online testing. So, the Cantab online battery. So using those methods, again, to collect the cognitive functioning, and then we'll use those functional data with the biomarker data and the behaviour change over time to look at whether the changes that might be happening through a health promotion campaign are actually leading to a lower actual risk of dementia in the long term.
Brilliant. It sounds like you're gathering the baseline evidence of first what people's understanding is, instead of teaching people what they already know, so you can focus your interventions and your modifiable risk factor interventions on what they may need to work on, and that sounds like a perfect public health policy as well, or the right way of doing it, and a really good use of surveys. And I have a few questions around it. So, and this is pure naivety, I haven't done a survey, but how did you target the people who received the survey, or did it go to everyone over the age of 18, say, or how did you know who to send them to?
So we had anybody who's aged 50 or over and lives in Tasmania could join. So we just had a big campaign and it's actually only just closing now. So we've had enrolment into the cohort open for 3 years. And we've done a lot of community engagement, lots of talks in community, a lot of media and social media and so on, encouraging people to come and join. It's really, it is really cool. One of the things that, because we use the survey method, we're able to provide people with a thing when they've completed their surveys, which is like a report that tells them, kind of a traffic light sort of version of a report that tells them against 9 of the domains that they can do something about, what the World Health Organization guidelines suggest they might do to shift into a lower risk category. And so they take that, and what we've found is that a lot of our participants are talking to other people about what they're learning. So that's actually something that we're trying to find out a way of capturing the real effect, the flow-on effect of that kind of thing.
Amazing. And do you find that out of the 8,000 or so 8,000 or so have completed the survey so far? So it's there are about 500,000 people in Tasmania, and if it's 50 plus, that's quite a good proportion of the 50 plus, probably, is it? 8,000. And how do you know how representative it is of the overall population?
Yeah, that's 2 really good questions. One is, if we were to achieve 10,000, we would have had 5% of the population aged 50 and over. So that would have been kind of handy. Then if we had, the other question was?
Just around the national representativeness of it.
Yes.
Whether that was a goal or not.
Look, I think it needs to be. I think we know it's not entirely. We have, because it's an online research program run by university people, we have people who are prepared to engage with that environment. And there's no doubt that we've actually done some looking at behavioural phenotypes, and we have a much higher proportion of people in the cohort who have only 1 or 2 or maybe 3 risk factors, and then we've got a small proportion of the cohort that's got quite a few of them. So we're very aware that there is a skew. We just need to account for that in our analyses. Sure. And it also, I guess, gives us, what can we learn from these people that we can then transfer into community, perhaps in a way that's more accessible. Achieving, So we have to work with what we have, but we understand that there are some limitations. Yeah.
Sure. I've yet to see a longitudinal cohort that doesn't. So I don't think it exists.
Indeed. Yeah. But it'd be a dream to have true representation. But again, for us to be able to do this in the long term, we're trying to, as part of what we're doing is also trying to create a sense of community in our cohort now so that they'll stay. And then, so it's very hard to do longitudinal studies with full representative samples, I think.
Yeah. But so many interesting things that threads that I could pull on from all of that. It's fascinating. I think you've covered a lot of key things around surveys, even just that last point of maintaining and reducing attrition by making it worthwhile to take part, because they are time consuming. Cool. So that's a really brilliant description of the method, and a great example of how it's being used from Petra and Larissa. So to get into the detail and provide some top tips for anyone new to using the method, I'm going to ask some straightforward questions of both guests on how to put the method into practice. Petra, the first ones are for you. Is a survey a robust method to inform research, or do you think there are better approaches?
It's going to depend on your research question, but I could listen to Larissa talk about that research all day. It was just so fascinating to hear about the whole approach and how to get people involved. And for me, that's the bit I always find interesting about surveys. I think when people think about a survey, or they're told there's a class on surveys, they think it's going to be something about, maybe something about statistics, or maybe it's something about design, but they're not really sure, and they see it's quite dry and boring. But that whole sense that Larissa was saying about building a community and getting representative people involved, and how do you, the capacity to be able to get data, so much data online, but then who that might bring in or leave out, those questions for me are the interesting ones. So I think any method can be robust if it's the right method for the question and we're using it in the right way. I think surveys get a bit of a bad reputation because, again, when we were listening to Larissa talk, what's hidden behind that is it's taken 3 years to get those 8,000 people. The volume, it's not going to be just Larissa doing this work, the volume of work to find people and get them involved and keep them there and make them feel included and ensure their data's used, and that lovely sense of them having not just a sort of involvement in the survey, but the fact that they get some answers about their own health back so that they feel really included. That to me is part of the sort of robustness, in that it's making everybody feel part of the job, part of the research. We're sort of co-producing this project. But I think what most people think about is probably what they do in a lot of cases, which is, I need to find out something. It's just crossed my mind that I'm interested in it. I'll quickly type out a few questions tonight. I'll send that out on a link, and that's my survey done. And then they suddenly find the question was phrased badly, or nobody wants to reply. So there's an awful lot of stuff that has to be done very early on in surveys, and people are, I think, always surprised to find, to make it robust, the amount of planning and designing and piloting, the ethics, thinking really, really carefully about what you're going to do and who you're going to do it with. And I think, again, crucially, it could be a really good design, it could be really robust, it could be the right thing to be using, but if the participants don't want to use it, then you are kind of a bit stuck. So that is also something I think people need to bear in mind, that just because you would like to use a survey doesn't mean your participants would. And I found in my own research, sometimes, we want to avoid a survey because we feel it's too constraining. We want to let people chat and talk, but actually they'd rather have the constraint of a survey, particularly on very emotional and sensitive topics. But equally, sometimes when you give them a survey, it's in the wrong language, or it's designed in an inaccessible way. And we can maybe talk a bit about that in a minute, around how to make it more accessible.
Yeah, I'd love to think about that. And you've mentioned some key things there about when you're preparing to produce a survey, and before you just dive in and make your survey monkey and send it to everyone, which I'm guilty of in the past. You mentioned piloting questions, ethics around the questions, and then checking the design. Are there other key things that someone should think about before producing a survey?
Yeah, I think one thing that people really don't think about often enough, and I think it's the way that we're taught research, is that we're always taught that it has to be new, that you've got to do something novel, and people interpret novel as in everything has to be new. Whereas I think at the moment, if I was interested in trying to sort of do a tracking piece of work and find out how people were coping and planning their health and their sort of health outcomes, it would make sense that I would look at what Larissa has done and see if I can use that research model and maybe even the same questionnaires, or adapt them slightly, rather than thinking I'm going to just start completely from scratch. In health and development and other areas, there's quite a lot of standardised measures we could be using, and that can make sense. We can use them alongside additional questions that we add of our own, or it might be that we take some time to develop a questionnaire ourselves. But I think it's not a quick method. I think people think it's really quick and it's easy, and it's about thinking of some questions, putting them into either a paper questionnaire or an online questionnaire, and then off you go. Whereas actually you need to be thinking of kind of the end point. Why are you doing this? How long is it going to take? What do you want to happen from this research? Who is going to be in it? How are you going to find them? Is a survey the best method for them? And if it is, in what format? Is it online? If it's online, do you need video? Do you need audio? Do you need descriptions? Do you need text? Do you need visual scales? How are you going to instruct them what you want them to do? If it's pen and paper, how are you going to do that? Is it postal, old-fashioned? But, in pandemic days, lots of people went back to that. Are you going to use a researcher? Is somebody going to be there on the phone or on the computer typing in the answers, or sitting by the person? All of those things will make a difference to how many people join in and how included they feel. So I think a lot of the time people assume because it's an easy method and they've done it a lot, they don't really need training. They don't really need much help. They can maybe read a book or do a quick, just try it themselves and see how it works. So, yeah, I think that would work, in terms of thinking about what makes it so interesting for me is also all of the stuff that goes into making it robust.
Brilliant. One thing is so many good things to ask yourself before designing. I imagine if most PhD students ask themselves those questions, answer them right and thoughtfully, they'll be off to a very good start. So another part of the start of a survey is the introduction. And you've both mentioned about keeping participants involved in a study or having them complete a survey once started. And I imagine the introduction is maybe where you get that across, the importance of it and things. So is there a certain approach you think is helpful when writing an introduction to a survey?
I think before you even write anything, again, it comes back to who are your participants, what are their specific and diverse needs, and there may be multiple needs. So this may not be just one approach. There might be lots of ways you're going to need to reach people and in lots of different places. And then how are you going to reach them? So, that's your recruitment strategy. And again, I think a lot of people forget that you need to do that. And it's probably why, if anyone's on social media, you see endless calls each day of please complete my survey with a link. There's no information on the survey. You don't know what the link's going to be about. Half the time it's not in any way relevant to you, but people are just desperate for numbers. And I think you need to think about, are we getting the right people? So, Larissa was really clear in describing who were the people that needed to be, the age group, where they were located, what they needed to do. Those are the things to think first. And then you need to think about, how can I make this interesting and inviting? I found quite often there's a disconnect between what charities or universities or organisations think is a priority, and that's lots of disclaimers and long-winded explanations and loads of logos, and every partner in the study has got to have a logo on there. And participants can be less interested with the very long ethics committee number and the fact that you've got this approval and that approval and you're this many ranked in the world in the university and there's 57 different icons in your description. They want to know, what's in this for me? Why should I sign up? Why is it interesting? So the bonus of this might tell you something about your health, or you could help other people, or it might be something fun to do. But this is really why we want you. And because we really want you, you can join in different ways. You can join in different formats. Maybe you've got a video of a researcher chatting and saying, hello, here I am. Would you like to join in my study? Certainly, I think we need to think again about various ways. So you've got the kind of advertising aspect. So, across social media, maybe on mainstream media, through other networks, through friends, through word of mouth, through sort of snowballing, all sorts of different ways. How do you want to get it out there, and how have you made sure that's accessible and ethical? Because quite often people will share a link to something that's really sensitive. Even something, say, if we're thinking about dementia, that say if I'd recently been diagnosed or I was worried about a relative, and suddenly popping into my timeline is a dementia study, that might make me feel very excited or happy that there's something I can join in with and help with my worries. But equally, I might feel really anxious that how did they know about that? Or, I'm upset enough about this, and now there's this piece of research just dropping in as if it's not even a big deal for me. So there's a whole thing of thinking around getting the information out there, and then when you are sharing information, is it done in the right languages that people speak, with different people that are appealing to them, that people seem like them, that they can relate to, in different ways that we all feel like, if I wanted to join this, it's not as simple as clicking a link. I think that's the big mistake people make. They think if I send a link, people will click on it, they'll join in. There's a connection, there's a relationship, there's a building, and that's the thing that takes the time. That's where it goes wrong. And I think when we teach surveys, we do a real disservice in not unpacking it. This to me, as you can see, is the fascinating part. I love talking about this. But we don't teach this routinely. And then when you do your survey and inevitably nobody joins in, or people complain, or they get angry, or they don't join in, or they say it's boring, you're panicking that you've only got 3 people and you wanted 300. All of that's making you feel like you failed as a researcher. Whereas actually, if someone had taught you to build this stuff as carefully as you would if it was a trial, or if it was focus groups, or if it was any other method, I think we'd probably be much happier researchers.
And there's plenty of room for improving the happiness of researchers in the world. So that's a nice way to finish on that. Okay, thank you so much. Again, so much richness. Now I'm going to just ask a few quick fire questions then, just to see if maybe there aren't any. But do you recommend any particular platforms for developing a survey and sending? I guess I'm thinking online surveys.
I think the key thing to note is if you're in a university, a charity, or another organisation, they may have a preferred platform you must use. So always check that first. I generally don't recommend platforms, because I think that actually you need to be looking at who are your participants, what's the most accessible platform for them. And again, it may be that an online survey is not right for you. In Larissa's case, I can't think of any other way to do it. But in other places, it might be, an interviewer sitting there with a laptop is the better way, and they would be using an online platform, but participants wouldn't. So it's about, choosing the platform, but also choosing what data is generated from it. Because I think we tend to think about front end. Does the platform let me ask the questions? But you need to think about back end, which is what is it going to give you in terms of data? If it's all scrambled and hard to follow, or you've got to do loads of recoding, you might want to investigate others. So again, that's another thing to think about.
Brilliant. And you've sort of alluded to it there as well, that sometimes online isn't the way forward. Other times it's ideal. And you mentioned earlier about during the pandemic, there were some more postal surveys being done and slightly more old fashioned. Are there any particular considerations for a postal survey, such as text size or readability, or things that online you can kind of get around maybe by using some translating app or something? Are there certain things you need to consider now with a postal one?
I think that the biggest thing with postal surveys is they are very, very unreliable in terms of response rates. So, I would say that if I would only use them if it's really what participants want. And yes, you absolutely have to think about only printing on one side. So if you print on both sides, quite often people miss the second page. So one side, big font, much bigger than you think you're going to need, and very clear instructions with worked examples. So don't say to somebody, tick this answer, because they don't know whether you tick at the side or in the box. You have to show them what you want them to do. But it's interesting you mentioned about font size and things for online surveys, because again, I think a lot of people don't think about accessibility, and they assume that everybody can expand text on their screens. A lot of people do these surveys on their phones. So actually using visuals, using one question per page, there's lots of things you can do to make it much more accessible. It looks longer, but it actually goes quicker. And again, thinking about either video descriptions, so people are showing you what to do, or if people are using screen readers. A lot of online surveys are terrible for screen readers. So, you've got to think about that too.
Okay, amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much for those answers. So much to consider and so much good guidance. Larissa, it's your turn. Are you ready for a few similar quick fire questions?
Sure, hit me.
Well, many of our listeners will be seeking the views of older people, carers, or those living with dementia. What special considerations extra that haven't been kind of discussed do you need to make to get input from these people?
Such an important question. I think I'm not sure I can. I just need to reiterate what Petra's been saying. You really have to know who you want to. You really need to know what your research question is and who it is you need to ask the questions of, and then put in place a recruitment and a participant engagement and management strategy that suits those people. I would not be expecting anybody who has dementia to be participating in Ireland, although I suspect that in time, over the 10 years of the study, we may find that some of our participants will. And so we have there's a second component to Ireland, which is a diagnostic clinic for dementia that's associated with the prevention clinic study. And so we have a way of, we ask people each year how they feel about their brain health, and we provide information about how they can access advice from the clinic if they're interested in finding out more. It's not within my capacity as a desk researcher to provide the kind of sensitivity and care that would be needed to administer a series of standardised questions for people who are living with, even with mild cognitive decline, really. But that's what does happen in the clinic, and it's a research clinic. And those questionnaires, we have quite a lot of common questionnaires in Ireland and in the clinic. And so the questionnaires are administered, but done so with a clinician or with a carer and or with a carer present. So I think that necessarily limits the scale of the kind of studies that you can conduct with people, unless you've got a lot of money. But it provides, you really just need to, research, do no harm. Absolutely, everything we do when we engage with our research participants is about, we're researching, we're gathering their information, to inform knowledge, and we need to make sure that what they get out of it is a sense of satisfaction and contribution. And I'm not sure what else I can say. I don't think that's the rule of thumb. I think you just have to be really aware and find out what needs to be done to make sure that you have that safety in place.
Okay, that's really thoughtful and sort of considered advice. Thank you. A major challenge of surveying people, and we've all sort of talked about it already, is ensuring you get enough responses. Now, you've had what seems like a fantastic response rate so far in Ireland. And what advice would you have for people to get more responses from survey participants?
It's a big challenge for us. I think with every longitudinal study, we're trying things out. We're going into community to provide feedback in community, and also for online through webinars to our participants to tell them what we've learned from the information that they've given us, and what we're doing next and what we plan to do with it. So we combine a fair bit of the data collection with telling people what it is we're learning and thanking them for being involved. We still, in that context, we've still got about half of the sample hasn't been back beyond baseline, which is a very high attrition. So we've still got all of their, well, the other thing is that our only mode of communicating with our participants is by email. So we know that there will be people who provided an email that's no longer active. So there'll be a proportion of people we just actually can't contact. We wish that we had also collected a mobile phone number at the time of that baseline. Sure. Looking back on that would have been more than one mode of contact would have been a wise thing to have included in that baseline survey. We've actually just decided that we're going to offer an incentive, and just five lots of $100 vouchers to Coles Myer, which is a very easy to use card here in Australia. And so they go into a draw if they complete the next wave of surveys coming up in October. So we'll be putting that out there to see whether it stimulates a little bit more engagement by people who haven't been coming back. We've got about 3,000 people who are just ironed on. They do everything we ask, which is great, but we need the others in order for it to be really interesting. I mean, more interesting.
Sure. And you mentioned there collecting a second contact detail, and I imagine it's not just a case of, oh, we just ask that now. I imagine there's ethics protocol and processes around that. But in your experience, what did the ethics committee look like, or what would it look like for those reviewing survey study applications?
I think, I don't know how to answer that question. I think a lot of applications for research would be survey-based. I think a lot of, and so I would imagine that people on ethics review boards would be familiar with the survey approach. So there may be some considerations about, well, why have you chosen this survey? But that would be because the protocol doesn't defend the choice of survey sufficiently. Sure. I think responder burden is a really big consideration. So, and it's something certainly in our study group, because we collect so much information from people. It takes an hour to do the annual survey, so it is a lot of time. And so in conversation with ethics, we've structured it so that people can finish a survey and then have a break and come back later, and they can start back again where they left off. Now there's something I was going to actually mention about retaining people and about creating the home. Yeah, but I'll finish on the ethics. I think that responder burden and making sure that there's a good fit, and also some questionnaires can, as Petra was saying earlier, they can, particularly if they're digging into a sensitive topic, they can be a little distressing. And so you need to wrap them up with support. And so again, it's just that making sure that there's the safety of the participant is front of mind, and that you're not, I think it's also got lots of these things, haven't I, coming up now. From an ethical perspective, if you're not going to use the data, even if it's interesting, don't ask it. It's not fair to collect data from people just because, you might also want to know about that, but you're not actually planning on using it, and it adds to this, the responder burden.
Responder burden. And what were you thinking of there that popped into your mind about keeping participants?
When the Island Study was first launched, it was launched as a series of surveys. So it was kind of, it was a string of surveys, and it was on within I'm at the Wicking Centre, and we have the Preventing Dementia and Understanding Dementia MOOCs. And so the learning management system that supports those MOOCs the surveys were kind of embedded in that learning management system. But it wasn't customized.
And MOOC, is that the massive open online course? Is that the idea?
Yes,
the free course?
Yes. Yes,
cool.
Thank you. Acronym. Yep. Very fair pull up. So that learning management system is customised for people who are going in to do an educational program, and that's what they're intending to do. But the surveys were not set up with the same intention. That didn't fit. So people, when they came to do the surveys, were presented with something that was, I'm not doing a course. Okay. And so I think we lost a lot of people who might have been interested to start with, just that. And then it wasn't. So one of the things we did in that very first year was very quickly, we actually closed off recruitment, and we created an island home using the learning management system, but actually creating, so every participant has their own profile page where their dementia risk profile is stored for each wave of surveys, where it's familiar. So all of the study information that they want, plus the access to their newsletters and events that are coming up and things, are all in the one place. So every time we assess we get them to come back and log back into Island Home. And that, I think, has made, I really wish we'd had that in place when we first launched recruitment, because we would have perhaps kept some of those people in the
that sounds like really good learning and adapting and then benefiting from reflecting on it. Sounds ideal. You've mentioned that it can sometimes take about an hour to complete the surveys. I'm imagining there's a lot of information coming in, a lot of data. And how do you approach analysing the results?
I need a clone. Clear the data. So I'm very fortunate. I have worked with some awesome data managers, and we, as Petra was saying before, the planning that goes on behind the collection of survey data is so much work that goes on. So we're not just planning all of the experience out the front, we're also planning how the data is going to be collected and managed, particularly for a long-term project over time, and with a complicated rolling baseline. So what I do is I talk to Tim and Alex, who do a fantastic job of documenting and securing the waves of data, and I ask them to give me access. So there's nobody in the Island team that accesses the raw data from the surveys because of the complex nature of the way in which it's collected. So it's held under some fairly strict data management protocols, and we send a request in, and I want these variables for this reason, I'm going to do this with it. And that way they know what shape I want, that way they can provide me some information about the shape, how to interpret the shape of the data. So we clean it, we have a look at, is what I'm looking at following a normal curve, or is it skewed or whatever, so that we can understand what analytic method we would use to answer the questions that we've collected the data for. So you always intend to use this strategy, then you get your data and it might not be quite that shape. So it's working out. There's quite a lot of time involved in doing that prep work. And then you let it start telling its story. I love that bit.
That must be so exciting when you just see patterns and answering in real life. That's okay, awesome. The last wee question is, and it's maybe related to that, planning how the data looks like at the end, but do you find that your survey in Ireland has more open-ended or close-ended questions?
Most of the data that we generate through the surveys is quantitative, so it's mostly numeric. We do have short text responses to some variables, which we can then code and treat and use in analyses. We then also, wherever we feel like it might be, whether we want to get some more information about the experience, or we feel that participants might want to tell us something more about what happened for them, we provide free text boxes. We've done some really great topic modelling with data that comes through from, not so much through Ireland, but through the Massive Open online courses, which is looking at the feedback from participants and doing some wonderful establishing of themes and mapping of the kinds of content that people discuss in those online settings. But we haven't, so doing the Preventing Dementia MOOC is one of the interventions within Ireland, but for Ireland itself, we don't collect a lot of qualitative data in the main, under the main study protocol.
Sure. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Okay, so I am going to try and recap some of that fascinating guidance, stories of putting it into practice, and general advice into my few top points, for 5 learning points. So for me, some of the areas that I learn most about is that surveys can be as robust as many other research methods. Depending on the research question, they can be the most appropriate approach. And But the important thing to bear in mind is that a good, robust, relevant survey, they're not quick to design. So although that's what everyone probably says and thinks at the outset, there can be a lot of work to ensure that it is actually a good survey. Sure, anyone can produce a pretty rubbish survey in a coffee break, but to actually have the right questions to design appropriate, ethical, thoughtful questions that will capture what you're looking for, you need to spend quite a lot of time, and that involves trialing the questions, piloting it, and tweaking as necessary. Along with that, so a second point for me was about the introduction section. So I think I probably had in mind that you said, oh, please, thanks for taking the time to answer these short questions, and this is how long it'll probably take you. But there's so much more to it. If you wanted a big survey that takes a lot of time, you have to kind of give something back to the participant and tell them what the pros and cons are of taking part, things that they may benefit from, things that might worry them, things that might be an issue, and explain that up front. And then as one of the participants said, to sort of to wrap it with a safety mechanism around that, a support mechanism around the survey. So that idea of a much more detailed, thorough introduction section is really important. And then finally, everyone has talked about generating a sense of community among participants, and how that can help prevent withdrawal from the study, and probably give a much bigger sense of participation that for those who take part, in a sense of community. So that can take any form, that sense of community, I guess, and it depends on what way would work for the participants and the people you're asking the questions of. So Larissa gave the example of having a platform where each participant has their own individual profile, where they can track their dementia risk. And I imagine how interesting and how much ownership that would give each participant over that data, and this sense of this is a valuable thing. I'm not just giving my information away to someone, but it's being organized for me. And that's a really good service to provide for participants. I know I've said finally, but finally, planning what the survey answers will look like afterwards. So the back end of the survey is also something that can take a lot of time at the outset, and probably a lot of planning meetings with data scientists and with the people who are going to be using the data. But it sounds like it's massively worth spending time on that beforehand, and that probably every minute you spend on that will save you an hour of pain and suffering afterwards when it comes to analyzing the data. It seems like, yeah, if you can ask questions in certain ways, that'll make it easier and more logical, or even just possible to analyze at the end of the survey, then you'll be doing yourself a lot of good service later on. So hopefully the information we've already shared will ensure you don't face any issues. However, in this final part of the show, we're going to discuss some common pitfalls, challenges, and how to avoid them. Petra, what are the common pitfalls and how do you avoid them?
Well, I think we've probably covered an awful lot in this discussion, but I would sort of sum up by saying one of the big pitfalls is trying to do this all yourself without any kind of testing or planning, jumping straight in, thinking it's easy. I hope we've demonstrated that, even if you're doing a very small questionnaire, not anything as large as Larissa's taking on, which is phenomenal. Even if you were doing a few, maybe 50 people or something like that, you still need the quality, the planning, all the work, working with colleagues, people who know how to do data, all of that stuff together, people who are expert in design is important. I think I would just add on top of that, ensuring the things about accessibility is really crucial. I know I've said that, but it is missed so often in research. And we've talked a lot about participant well-being and participant safety, but I think we also need to remember researcher well-being. And that might be that the nature of the questions you're asking is quite draining or demanding or upsetting. So you do need help, even if you're getting lots of quantitative data back. You're still thinking about what that quantitative data means, and that can be quite challenging. But separately, I think that if you've got low response rates, or if you're struggling with your data, or if it's a very stressful time, or that in a lot of these projects you're under considerable pressure to get lots of information in, is making sure you're not coercing people in because you just need to get those numbers up, and you're not being made to feel bad if you're not actually getting that information back yourself. So I think all of it's really about getting supported. It's about being trained. It's about being supervised. It's having space to reflect. And hopefully really enjoying the method. I hope we've shown through this discussion that it's so interesting, and there's so many angles to it. If you've got other people you can share that with, it can really help on the days when it's a long, hard slog. It's a hard method to use. It's not an easy method.
Okay, thank you. And Larissa, you covered a lot of challenges and learning points, and you've adapted the approach. Are there other things which you have learned along the way that you'd like to impart to potential survey users, survey designers, I should say?
Thank you. There is one thing, Donncha, I would like to say. First of all, forgive the absence of my moving face. My internet connection is a little weak. But the use of survey data for research is really powerful. We can draw our conclusions from it, and then the benefit of using the same measures across multiple studies, so the same questionnaires to generate data from multiple studies and pull that data together, is undermined if you change your surveys, if you change the questionnaires. So the best thing, I remember doing a meta-analysis in my PhD where I went in and it was so frustrating because it's quite common for people to adapt or change or adjust an established questionnaire with probably good reason to try and make it a little more relevant to their participants or to their research question. But actually what you're doing is undermining the ability to answer what a lot of people say in response to these questions, which is the great benefit of pooled data. So I guess there's a lot of work that goes into validating psychometric scales and questionnaires that are used in social and behavioural research. And if you're going to adapt one, it would be good to validate it. But it was a bugbear of mine doing a meta-analysis of data generated from measures that had been somewhat adapted.
Mm-hmm. Okay, really valuable lesson. And it sounds like it'll prevent people reinventing the wheel if there's already quite a good survey there. Use it. Okay, well, thank you. Folks, this has been really, really great. I've learned so much, and I hope our listeners have too. It seems that clearly a well-built survey can provide valuable information, but if you get it wrong, you could be wasting your time and maybe more importantly, your participants' time. Hopefully listening to today's podcast has saved all of you yourselves some time in your jobs and some frustration, and will help in your research. Just before we finish up, I just wanted to ask Petra to give us a quick rundown to tell our listeners in 1 minute what they should go away and read to further their knowledge on this method.
I would say go and look at surveys in the wild. We're blessed with so many of them now. So go and look at them. Think about what would you do differently? How would you, who do they leave out? Who could they bring in? So that's one thing. If you've got any opportunity to be trained in surveys and you want to use surveys, I would always recommend it. As we've heard here, all of us do a survey and at the end think, I wish I'd done this differently. So talk to people who've used surveys, get trained up. And I would say, I wrote a guide years ago, a 3-part guide that was in the British Medical Journal called The Hands-On Guide to Questionnaires. And although it's a bit outdated now, the very basics of what we've been talking about are set out there. And also Helen Cara has written a lovely little book. It's only $7.99 and it's called Write a Questionnaire, a Little Quick Fix. And that's quite a nice little guidebook to just talk you through the basics. But as I said, I would never attempt doing a survey, small or large like Larissa's doing, without a lot of support and training too.
Okay, brilliant. Well, that is all we have time for today, folks. I would like to say a huge thank you to our guests. We've had the wonderfully helpful Dr. Larissa Bartlett sharing her experiences, and in Expert Corner, the incredible Dr. Petra Boynton. Thank you both. It has been a real pleasure. If listeners want to know more about survey methodology or more about the NCRM, the National Centre for Research Methods, dementia research, or our guests today, you will find all the links in the show notes. And remember, if you found this useful and learned some stuff, then please share this podcast with your friends or leave a review online and subscribe to the Dementia Researcher podcast. I'm going to end the show by encouraging you all to complete our short survey to share your feedback on the show. Only joking. Have a great day.
Brought to you by dementiaresearcher.nihr.ac.uk in association with Alzheimer's Research UK and Alzheimer's Society, supporting early career dementia researchers across the world.